Hi everyone, welcome to the PwC series around customer transformation, digital transformation, AI and data. This episode we are going to be discussing the Middle East in motion, and I'm joined by our panel members, Ibrahim, Tracy and Robbie. Folks, thank you for joining us today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, thanks for having us.
So let's get straight into it. And Robbie, maybe I'll ask you the first question.
Sure.
What do you describe the current landscape in the Middle East and the innovation that's happening in the region?
Well, thanks for having us firstly, Quinton. Great to be here. The Middle East is one of the most important business hubs in the world. And that has only accelerated in the last couple of years. Salesforce are really happy to be here, to open our office here and bring some of the innovation from a Salesforce perspective to the region. There's a number of reasons that's driving this. If we take a couple of them, firstly, there's a huge amount of government-led change and initiatives. You know, we have the KSA vision in 2030, we've the innovation strategy here in the UAE, we've similar programs in Qatar and Oman, and that's driving a huge amount of change and a huge amount of innovation in the region. So first and foremost, it's that. Secondly, I would say just the amount of tech startup and venture capitalist investment here in the region has really accelerated it. It's brought a lot of talent to the region, it's brought a lot of multinationals to the region. It's really driven a lot of the growth, and that's also affecting the amount of innovation that we have here in the region. And lastly, I think the biggest one really is AI and the world that we are now living in AI and how that's affected us all globally. It's really empowered everyone across globally, and but how do people do it? How are people embracing AI? I know we're going to talk a lot about it here today. You know, Salesforce do a lot of studies ourselves, and in the last study we do a state of AI study. And the last one I read, actually, so about 50% of sales organizations here in the Middle East have implemented a full AI, or say they've started with a full AI strategy. From a marketing department, it's a little bit less, maybe a third. And then from a service perspective, around 40%. So a lot of people are already progressed down the road a lot, but there's still a significant amount of work to do. So the innovation in the region is fast, it's growing, and from a Salesforce perspective, we're delighted to now be here and be involved in that.
So data, AI, agentic, I mean, it feels like a topic that we were inevitably going to get into today. As Robbie was saying, there's already big inroads in that area. Tracy, I know we're doing a lot as a local firm. There's loads going on in the region. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think, you know, in the region we certainly are seeing, you know, driving on innovation. So I think if we look at from a data perspective, clients are really starting to harvest and look at how they're going to use their data. So using the data to drive real insights about their consumers, about their customers, is something that we're certainly seeing. I think we recently working with a client and just looking at their loyalty reward program. And for them, it's, you know, it's all about the data. Whether not having access to that data or knowing their customer is prohibiting them from being able to drive those personalized insights. So shaping customers and be able to recognize when customers are coming in to really tailor the experiences for customers. So it's hugely exciting. We're seeing it across retail, we're seeing it across government, and it's the pace is fast. I think, so, you know, there's days that you think that you are ahead of the game and that you're doing something for the first time, but actually it's, you know, someone's done it already today, tomorrow there's something new. So it's an exciting time.
So I'm going to go off script as I'm known for, and so maybe I'll ask, what we've seen is this adoption. Robbie, you've said, I think you said 50% for sales, 40% for service,
yes.
30% in marketing. I mean, those are pretty remarkable.
Yes.
Then we've seen organizations that have gone quite bold and quite fast into agentic and replacing humans, and some are now actually starting to backtrack on that. Mm-hmm. And so what are you hearing from customers? Where's the gold in the sweet spot? You know, how much do you automate? How much do you agentify? And how much do you keep humans in the loop?
Well, I think everyone's on a different journey, Quinton. So like you have those early adopters who've gone in and tried to say, right, let's try and change everything, and probably made a couple of mistakes. So they have kind of gone a long way down the journey and now are potentially maybe a little bit backtracking because they've at the learnings. So they've said, let's try this use case, let's try this use case, because in my experience, where I've seen success is where people will have a defined use case. We want to have an order taker agent, or a booking agent, or a customer service agent. We've an airline now in the Nordics who's doing like things, very interesting things around agents, around what are they doing to the traveller, what are they doing prior to the travel, during travel. So really it's a case of who's already gone down the line, who's made some of those use cases, found them successful and found them unsuccessful. So you might have somebody who's made a journey and is now backtracking a little bit because they've got made some of those mistakes, where others who haven't been those early adopters, let other businesses be those sort of trials or guinea pigs, as you were, and they're the ones now. So you're right. There's that. Some people are backtracking because they've gone through and learned and had those use cases, developed the use cases and learned from some of those, where others are now adopting from the first steps.
But another observation that we've certainly had, and I think traditionally you're looking, when we come to do large-scale transformations, we're looking at a use case from start to end, and it may be a series of use cases that would need to be implemented. So if I look at some of the early use cases that we implemented, we might have done it over 5-10 months. Whereas the lessons learned from that was, whilst we saw that transformation through, by the time we got to the end, we were starting again. So I think it's taking smaller use cases, trial and error, to move them forward, and having shorter cycles or more agile cycles of try and fail and refine and fail or progress from there. Whereas I think traditionally we're very used to saying, this is the scope of work that we want to deliver, these are all the use cases, but by the time you've defined the use cases, the first 1, 2, 3 are already dated and there's another few added.
You're trying to hit a moving target, really.
It's a moving target,
exactly.
it's a moving target, so.
Yeah, and to add to what's already been mentioned, I think what happened over the past couple of years is AI in the boardroom quickly went from excitement to expectation.
Yeah.
So that created a lot of pressure on enterprises to deliver on AI. Now, to your point and to what the colleagues have mentioned already, there have been lessons learned. Now, yes, it boils down to the use case, and it also boils down to upskilling your workforce. So it's not always necessarily a case of ripping the headcount and replacing it with a machine. You need to upskill your workforce to also manage that change across the enterprise.
Yeah, I think that's very real. I was speaking to a couple of people last week, and you nearly got to see the agentic workforce as workforce, and you've got to train them. So it's not about deploying; it's about on deployment you've got to give it some time. It's onboarding of a colleague rather than a new technology. So, and I think people are learning about the new operating model and how that all sort of works together. But Ibrahim, I think maybe now's the right time. I mean, Saudi is a melting pot of innovation. And I think picking up from what Tracy's just said, it sounds like we're moving away from, Tracy, if I understood you correctly, large-scale end-to-end transformations into much more innovative type of cycle, smaller increments of innovation. Saudi seems to be leading in this space.
Yep.
Give us your idea of what's happening in the region.
So in Saudi today, we're at a very interesting inflection point, right? It's a place where speed meets execution. Now, what's setting Saudi apart is that this is happening with a convergence of a very clear national vision, rapid regulatory transformation, and then you've got significant investments in areas like infrastructure, tech, talent, and so on. So when we bring these things together, what we're also seeing in Saudi is that the public sector in specific, and across the board when it comes to the private sector as well, is organizations are becoming a catalyst to this transformation rather than just sitting back and saying, I'm a policymaker or I'm a regulator. They're becoming a catalyst for this transformation. Now they're doing this through public-private partnerships across multiple sectors, whether it's healthcare, energy, logistics, you name it. When we combine all of these things together, I think it sets Saudi up as a very strong case study of what happens when you embed innovation within a national vision. Now, at Salesforce, we see this firsthand, right? We're seeing customers shift, to your point, from the traditional model of a traditional system of records, transactional model, into a hyper-focused, experience-led, personalized at-scale model. And I think the combination of this, along with the capabilities that are now being brought into the kingdom, it's setting up Saudi for an amazing trajectory.
That sounds really, really amazing. You've just spoke about the opportunity and the innovation and I suppose, the momentum in the market.
Yeah.
I assume, like anything, there's got to be some challenges. And so what are the challenges that you're facing as you look to adopt these new innovations and technologies?
Now, the challenges we're facing across the board in Saudi, some of which are new challenges because we're treading into new uncharted waters, right? Now, some other areas are a byproduct of the intersection between scaling at speed and doing a major transformation. So the challenges become multidimensional. Now, some of the challenges are what we mentioned earlier around the adoption of proper use cases. Some of the challenges are around upskilling your workforce. Some of the challenges are around data fragmentation. So now the good thing is there's a cultural shift happening. Now the cultural shift that's taking place today is taking all of these challenges and converting them into opportunities. And again, at Salesforce, we see this firsthand. When we're talking today to our customers, they don't look at this as a problem statement or a challenge. They look at it as an opportunity to define a new category or define a new sector. So all in all, the challenges vary based on industry, but the headline is that this cultural shift is really, really helping the adoption of the opportunities that arise from these challenges.
That's interesting, because I suppose I've long held the opinion that the adoption of technology, but particularly the adoption of AI, is not a technology problem. It's often sitting in other parts, right? It's operating model, it's process, it's people, it's upskill, it's all the stuff you've just mentioned. I mean, Tracy, I think that's where PwC plays a big role. How do you see us helping both Salesforce and our customers overcome these challenges?
So I think we very much aligned, and having worked now in the region for some time, and particularly in Saudi, I think the appetite for change is there. And I think that's normally a challenge that we will see with clients. There's a resistance for change. There's an appetite for change. There's a push and there's a pull and a demand for change, which is great and refreshing. I think where we've seen a need to particularly to support is how do we advise around op model changes. Workforce is another, and how do we get the workforce comfortable with agentics and working with agents. I think there's a fear that people are being replaced is one, but I think we're starting to move away or moving past that to how do I interact and how do I complete my day-to-day tasks. So I think there is certainly a workforce element there. Where we've seen, and particularly on some of the more recent engagements, is it's around data. So whilst the data and security around data is one area, it's that in not all cases does the data exist. So it's, a lot of it will be on paper, how we're getting and digitizing some of that information, and in some cases it doesn't even exist there. So it's harvesting some of those policies, procedures that don't exist today. So we would particularly spend a lot of time looking at what does need to be some of the securities that need to be in place, frameworks that need to be in place, but also the policies and procedures around some of this data that needs to be established in order for us to then comply to data regulation.
Maybe that's a good segue for my next questions, Robbie. Salesforce has long been a leader in the markets that they operate. What's your thoughts about the technology landscape in region, in the Middle East as a whole? There's loads of investments coming in from some of your competitors. What's Salesforce's position?
Well, I want to start where Tracy finished there, and you raised two so topical and relevant topics firstly around data. I'll talk a little bit about data, but secondly around people and how this agentic shift is maybe having a profound impact on humans, and how we are really now in a situation where we have a huge amount of responsibility ourselves here right now, because whatever we're doing now is going to define the next couple of generations. So let's start with data. Data is the fundamental foundation of everything we talk about when we talk about any sort of innovation, especially when we talk about Agentforce and AI with Salesforce. Unless we have a clear data strategy, unless we know what sort of data we're going to bring into the LLM, the model, what other sources we're going to review and we're going to use for that, we have to have that as a foundation. And Salesforce, we have a product called Data Cloud, which it's the fastest growing organic product we ever had. Okay, we've had a couple of iterations of it, and now it was a really big shift forward for us because we're moving from our traditional license model of licensing per seat to a consumption-based license. And you know, at the start, it was kind of a little bit concerned: how do we do this? How do we move it? And how do we shift? And how do we predict? But then when we started kind of unlocking things like zero copy and having zero copy data, that's when people really understood, okay, now we see the value of using something. So when we talk about data, using a product like Data Cloud is key. But then we shift to the elephant in the room, which is this AI and Agentforce and this agentic labor revolution. And people are concerned what's going to happen with our roles. But let me kind of paint a picture. Imagine a situation where you are hiring for a number of professionals, sales professionals, service professionals. Put yourself in a situation where potentially you could hire a digital representation of that person. What would be the value of that? What would be the impact of that? Why would you do this? And what would that mean for your customers? Now can you give your customers a digital representation of this person? And how would that affect efficiency? But then you also have the question around what's happening with roles. But how Salesforce see this is a huge opportunity for everyone to improve efficiency, to put those humans working with technology, not replacing with. And it's very important that we look at that because that's how we're going to move forward. And it means that we can be, you know, you look at all of the roles we had. I actually was trying to explain this to my mother about, you know, what's this Agentforce and AI like. And I said, you know, remember those people in the old movies in the 50s and 60s that used to unplug the phone call, plug it in somewhere else? You know, there's roles that have just technology has moved those people on and moved them into more efficient roles. So this is a real ethical and data and trust and data residency. A lot of questions to answer here, but to me, the agentic labor revolution is here, and it's a case of how we do this. So the first thing is the data cloud, agent clouds, and some of the other products. The second thing I would say is around people. Salesforce is investing heavily in the region. You've heard from Ibrahim what we're doing in KSA in Saudi Arabia, but also here in the UAE. We have our new office, we have a new talent, we're investing heavily into the ecosystem. So, you know, the technology is good and it's important, but the people is just important, and it's really important that we bring the people in the ecosystem with us. So Salesforce is heavily investing in the region. And the last thing, to go back to it, is data. And we are having to really challenge ourselves with some of the restrictions that Ibrahim has mentioned, partnering with somebody like AWS in the region to make sure we're addressing some of the data residency restrictions we have here. So we're here, we're investing big, but I would say that it's a case of looking at the product, the people, and then some of the data regulations that we have to meet, Quentin.
Oh, brilliant. Robbie, I'm going to ask, so one of my colleagues said he thinks that possibly Data Cloud should have had a different name because
it did.
There's so
it's
much,
had about 4 or 5 names at this stage, yeah.
But there's loads of confusion because
Yes.
there's, you know, clients look at you and say, but why don't I need Data Cloud? I've got Snowflake.
Yes.
And so maybe I could ask you, what's your description of Data Cloud and what the unique value it offers in a I suppose a fragmented data world, as you mentioned before?
Well, I'll start with look at it. It starts off with the Salesforce ecosystem, this deeply unified platform that we have. That's where it starts. We have had a number of iterations of this product. We launched it as, I think, Customer 360, Genie. You saw this a couple of years ago at Dreamforce, CDP, and now Data Cloud. So you're right. If somebody has you know, some data warehouse is a little bit confused, Snowflake, for example, other technologies. Where Data Cloud will really come into its own is when you look at this from an end-to-end. We talk about, you know, use cases with Agentforce. If we're coming in saying, hey, we want to have a conversation around data, we want to start with Data Cloud as a standalone, it's probably not the right conversation to have. But if we're looking to say, what are the solutions, what are the problems in your business you're trying to solve? Have you got an AI strategy? What is your data strategy in that AI strategy? There's a lot of technology options around. I think it's incredibly tough for businesses to try and navigate the competitive landscape that's getting even more competitive. But if you're asking me for the one single differentiator, Quentin, it's the deeply unified platform with Salesforce, looking at this from a full solution and making sure what are the data sources we need to understand. Things like the zero copy with partners like Snowflake, for example, is incredibly powerful. But really for me, it's in that deeply unified platform, and that's where we would come as a full Salesforce ecosystem and not a Data Cloud product play.
I mean, Robbie's just spoken about loads of, I suppose, messages you'd probably take into the market. What are the key things you're speaking to clients about in Saudi at the moment? As Salesforce, I suppose, is it fair to say, gets going? It's a fairly recent investment. What are the main topics that you see?
Well, before I get into the topics, let me just spend a couple of seconds on the investments. We're as Robbie mentioned, we're heavily investing in the kingdom, and it's not just an investment in terms of the $500 million that Salesforce is pledging to invest in the kingdom over the coming years. It's also an investment on Hyperforce. So we're bringing our Hyperforce capabilities inside the kingdom. And the third part of this, so it would be the $500 million investment, the Hyperforce investment, and then we're pledging to train and upskill 30,000 people within the coming years in Saudi. So these are the investments we're doing. Now, what are we trying to solve today for our customers? It's going to link back to this. So what we're doing today with customers revolves around multiple topics. Now, what I would always like to focus on with customers is when it comes to, as Robbie mentioned, their AI strategy, AI cannot be a standalone system. And you cannot have AI sitting outside in a separate box. It has to be embedded inside the entire ecosystem. And this is what sets Salesforce apart from the others, because when we look at the entire ecosystem and the entire platform, it's one spot where the customer has secure, governed, and AI embedded data. And this allows them to solve for their problems, which are either intelligently and intuitively automating tasks and processes, or whether it's, again, experience-led, personalized at scale models that they take to their customers, or intelligent decision making. So it's multi-dimensional, it has different areas, but the one constant we always talk about with customers is how can we help you serve your customers better? And this is the entire motion that we go through.
I suppose that's always been the DNA, customer obsessed, right? And
Right,
as long as whatever changes technologically, I suppose that always stays the one anchor.
Yeah.
Tracy, I know we're a large sponsor at Salesforce World Tour, or Agentforce World Tour, as it's called now. Let me get it right. What are the key messages that you've got for our clients? Because busy, loads of things going on, Agentforce, Data Cloud. What are the couple of key things
I think the key the messages for us, I think this year we're going to see a huge focus on Agentforce, and I think everybody will have a perspective and be showcasing their capabilities in the space. I think we are probably looking at it a little bit differently, looking at sharing a little bit about our futures experience and then really taking people through a journey of how they can be looking to reinvent and where they should be looking to reinvent. So less about focusing on how do we solve for today and what's in front of us for today, but how do we solve for the future? And that will be a key focus for us this year. Outside of that, again, we certainly will have a display and be talking a bit about Agentforce and some of the agents that we built, particularly within real estate. So how do we automate some of those experiences for brokers, as an example, where you would be engaging with a broker for a property and really have that be an autonomous agent that can take you through a full sales journey. So I think this year for us, it will absolutely be a key focus around AI data. That will be a topical topic for us at World Tour, but I think for us, it's taking it beyond that. And I think people need to be thinking a little bit beyond that.
Yeah, and I think that's, honestly, Tracy, exactly that. People want to hear how. I think, we all know this AI is such the buzz. It's how. How do we actually execute? What is it? What does a good strategy look like? What does a good use case look like? And what does that feel like for the end user? And I think we're all excited, but what does it mean? We all know what happens. That first experience you've had when you go on and you've had a conversation and you go, was that an agent? That blurring the lines. I think we all want to see it now in, touch and feel these agents in practice.
Yeah, and maybe, as I consider that and probably look to bring us to a close, I think when I think of AI, I don't think this is a pure cost takeout play, because I think a lot of organizations, and our research shows us that leading organizations are thinking about cost takeout and automation as well as top-line growth and innovation, where they can invest in those future business models, future growth opportunities. And I think that balancing act of going, this cannot just be about cost is really important. Finding ways to, and maybe this is my personal view, but augmentation of people rather than replacement of people is probably where we're looking. And I think PwC's role in this is, how do we use the great tools provided by our partners like Salesforce, become those information architects? How do we create the blueprint of the future digital and human labor force, where we know what the processes are, we know which agents to use, when to bring a human into the loop. And so the more we focus on that to bring that sort of innovation and advancement in an organization. But I think it's an exciting time. I think I've enjoyed the discussion. I hope you have too.
Thank you.